Hey everyone, welcome to Chapter 9. Here's Chapter 9. We're really making some good headway here, and I hope that this PowerPoint, this somewhat new way of going over the chapter can help you. This week we're looking at prepositions, compound verbs, and the word hoti. Hoti. See that down here? Hoti. So, let's dive in. So, what are prepositions anyway? Well, prepositions show the relationship between nouns. And this relationship is usually spatial. So it'll be like on something, over something, next to something, underneath something, behind something, in front of something. Those are all prepositions. Over, under, behind, between, that kind of thing. Next to, among, around, above, and so on. So, what about Greek prepositions? Well, in Greek, prepositions work essentially the same way. They show the relationship between nouns, but there are a couple of important points that we need to remember. The object of a preposition could be in the genitive, dative, or accusative case, depending on what the author wants to say. Now, what's the object of a preposition? Well, the object is, think about it as like the second noun in that two-noun relationship. So for instance, right now I'm working at a computer. If I say, I put my computer on the table, that phrase on the table is a prepositional phrase. The word on is the preposition, right? Because it shows the relationship between computer and table, and the word table is the object of the preposition. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, think about it as like the second noun in that two-noun relationship. Now, what about the cases? Well, I've written here the object could be in the genitive, dative, or accusative case. The important thing to remember with Greek prepositions, and we're going to get to this later in later chapters. I just want to keep hammering it, keep reminding you of it so that you know this is what we have to deal with. The important thing with Greek prepositions is that the object, the word that comes after the preposition, could change. The case of that word could change. And then if the case of that word changes, the meaning of the preposition also changes. I'm not going to give you any examples now because we're going to get to that, but I just want to keep reminding you. Bear that in mind. Some prepositions could have objects in any of the three cases, or in two of them. In those cases, the meaning of the preposition changes according to the case of its object. So what that means is that you could have a preposition with an object in the genitive case, and then that preposition might mean over, and then you could have the same preposition with an object in the accusative case, and that preposition then might mean because of, or something like that. We'll see more examples of this. Right now it's probably sounding all really weird and crazy, but we'll see more examples of this, and not just this chapter, but other chapters down the road. Third point for prepositions. Sometimes the object of a preposition will always be in the same case, like those words in the vocab list for this week. In those cases, the meaning of the preposition does not change. So if you look at the ones that you have to learn for this week, those words, you have a preposition, and then you have an object, and the object is always in one case, and it doesn't really matter. The meaning never changes. Switching topics. In this chapter, we also look at compound verbs, and this topic is kind of connected, as you'll see. So compound verbs are verbs with prepositions stuck to the front of them. So we just learned about prepositions, right? Like outside, in front of, under, next to, above, on, underneath. So what happens if those kinds of words get stuck to the beginning of a verb. In Greek, this happens all the time. And we would call them verbs with prepositional prefixes. For instance, the word ekbalo means I throw out. It comes from balo, which means I throw, and ek, which means out. It's important to remember that sometimes a compound verb can have a totally different meaning than the words that make it up. For instance, here we have the word upago, and it comes from the words ago, I lead, and huper, meaning under, but it does not mean I lead under. It means I depart or I go away. So learn compound verbs as individual words. Don't try to break them apart to find out their meaning. It's something that you often hear in what they call the word study fallacy, where you can look at one Greek word and sorry, it's not the word study fallacy. I can't remember what it is, but anyway, you can look at one Greek word and break it apart and say, in every case in the New Testament, it means this because when you break the word up, it means that. Well, the fact of the matter is that often these compound words can mean something completely different than the sum of their parts. And this is a great example. Upago does not mean I lead under, it means I depart or I go away. Now, prepositional phrases. So what's a prepositional phrase anyway? Well, we just talked about it. It's the preposition with the object, the words that it's relating to. For example, I put the pen on the table. On is the preposition and the table is the object. Another example, I ran around the house. Around is the preposition and the house is the object. So for both of these examples, the words that I have in italics are the prepositional phrase. And in Greek, it works exactly the same way. In Greek, it's the Greek word and then the Greek preposition, and then the object that follows it. Now, in Greek, prepositional phrases can have different functions. They can play different roles in the sentence. Sometimes a Greek prepositional phrase can describe a noun. In that case, it's working like an adjective. What that means is that the whole phrase, the preposition and the object, will say something about a noun. We see this in English all the time. Let's say, for instance, you see a group of people standing outside a building and you want to point out one of them. So you say, the lady standing next to the tree. Next to is the preposition and the tree is the object. The whole phrase, next to the tree, modifies or it says something about the lady. There might be 14 ladies in a group of 28 people, but you are pointing out exactly which lady you mean. Which lady? That lady, the lady standing next to the tree. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, in Greek, it's exactly the same function. So here's some examples in Greek. Ha ek tu uranu artos, the bread which is from heaven. Here we have the prepositional phrase and the word it modifies all together. Ha artos is the bread and ek tu uranu is a phrase meaning from heaven. In other words, the bread. Which bread? The bread which is from heaven. So that phrase ek tu uranu is describing the bread. The other common thing that a prepositional phrase will do is it'll act like a substantive. What that means is it'll act like a noun or a pronoun. The whole thing can play the role of a noun or a pronoun in a sentence. For instance, it could be the subject of a sentence or the object of a sentence. This is easy to understand, it's easy to get because it's basically the same in Greek as in English. In Greek, however, the prepositional phrase will always function as a substantive with the definite article, with some form of the word the. Here are some examples. Hoi ek tu paneru, the ones from the evil one. Notice if you translate it literally, it's the out of the evil. But because of how it's strung together as a unit, the whole point of this is together, it's a noun. It refers to a group of people, those from the evil one, the ones from the evil one. Notice how if we didn't have the hoi, if we didn't have the article, it wouldn't make sense as a substantive, but with the article it does. Here's another one. Your father en tois uranois. Your father who is in heaven. Ho pater hemon en tois uranois. Notice how here the prepositional phrase acts just like a relative pronoun. Your father. Which father? Your father who is in heaven. And one more thing, the word hoti. And here we're just describing what the word hoti is and what it does. Don't worry if it doesn't make sense to you yet. Hewett's approach is always to describe something first and then to flesh it out in the exercises. So I'm just going to go really quick through these. So first of all, it's most often translated with the words that or because, and it's always used to introduce a clause, meaning a group of words that could stand alone as a sentence. And it has 4 functions. The first function that hoti could perform is it could introduce a causal clause, a clause that introduces a reason for something, either a situation or an action taken. For instance, I ate lunch because I was hungry. The word because would be hoti. Second point, object clauses. It's pretty simple. The object of a verb, which is usually an intransitive verb, is introduced with hoti. I know that my dad is coming to visit. I know hoti that my dad is coming to visit. The word that would be replaced with hoti if you were translating. Direct discourse. This is where we talk about someone's direct quote. He told me, quote, I am going to get some lunch. He told me, hoti, I'm going to get some lunch. Indirect discourse. In indirect discourse, we're introducing what someone says without actually quoting them directly. This happens all the time. And again, here we're just noticing things about hoti. You don't have to memorize this. You don't have to memorize this list of rules. We're just trying to understand how hoti works. So in this case, it's, he told me that he was going to get some lunch. See how I have the same thing he said, but without a direct quote, without quote marks? That's indirect discourse. And in this case, the word that would be translated with hoti. And that's it for this chapter. So good luck for the exercises, and I will see you again soon. All the best.